So today's class, today's topic is all about um, administering inter-site connectivity within Azure. And then the topic we're going to be covering in this includes what we call VNet peering, that's virtual network to virtual network peering. And then we'll look at routing, network routing alongside with it. Okay, so when we talk about network peering, we'll be looking at a situation where you have different virtual network in Azure, and then you want a way to allow the resources within one Azure network, one virtual network, to be able to talk to another virtual network. So if you relate it to a standard environment, these have to do with environment where you have multi sites, like you have a primary site and then you have a secondary site. You have resources hosted in one site and you have resources hosted in another site, and you want a way by which they are able to communicate with one another. It can also be a situation where you have where you need to where you have resources in a place, you have different sites that is serving different purposes. So at the end of the day, you want one site to still be able to talk to the other. Either the users to be able to go to a particular site and get resources, or you want, for instance, you have AD in one virtual network environment, and then you have another AD in another environment, and you want them to be able to replicate, or his database, you want that replication, or you have a web server in one network and you have database server in another network. For them to be able to talk to one another, you need to ensure that those two networks can talk to one another. So those are a few, outside of generally use cases where you have to pair two networks together. So taking it back into the Azure environment, right? We have different use cases rather for pairing network in Azure. One of it is what we call global pairing. Global pairing is connecting two networks together across region. So for instance, I have resources, I have a VNet in the Western Europe region, and then I have another VNet in the US region, and I need them to be able to talk to one another. I want somehow connectivity between the two. So I'll be looking at what they call global pairing in that aspect. So what if I have within the same region, I have different VNets serving different purposes, but now there's a need for a server in one VNet to talk to a server in another VNet, but they are also within the same region. So that is what we call regional peering, right? Now, for you to pair, you can pair resources, or you can pair virtual network across either subscriptions or across tenants. So if you have different tenants that you have created for Azure, and you want, maybe you have a tenant that is serving for the development arm of your organization, and you have another tenant that is serving, or subscription that is serving for the operational arm of the IT arm of your organization. So at some point, the development team spin up a server, and now they want it to be transitioned into the infrastructure side of thing, which is the general IT tenant. So you can do VNet to VNet peering to enable communication across them. So peering network uses Azure Backbone for privacy and isolation purposes. So everything Azure or Microsoft do, they ensure that they consider the privacy of the resources. There might be a situation where you might have created also those different virtual network before, maybe because you want to be able to manage or ensure privacy and compliance within your organization. So it means even though you are pairing, they are still running in isolation, kind of. Not that things are mixed up together. So you can do the pairing and tell who and who can really pass through, or what traffic can pass through the pair pipe. The pair pipe, yes. Then it's very easy to set up, and it encourages or give organization the ability to be able to transfer information or transfer file or data from one virtual network to the other. Now, when we talk of the virtual network, you are going to look at the components that are that make up, that allow you to be able to do what we call the pairing. So when you create a virtual network, take a virtual network in Azure, take it as a virtual switch or as a switch that you have. You have two switches that connect different resources at different times. But now you need a way by which the resources or the users on one switch is able to exchange information with user on another switch. For you to be able to do that, you will bring in a gateway. So in that case, we will also need what we call the gateway. We talk about during the last class, we talk a lot about networking. So gateway, saying things like gateway, I don't think it should be strange to us this week, because we talked about it extensively during virtual networking in the last class. So one of the components that you will need is a gateway. The gateway allows the peer virtual network to share the gateway and get access across the resources hosted in different environments. So if you look at this diagram, you will see VNet A here. VNet A have its own subnet. Okay? And then Tosin, please, if you're on the call, let me know so that I can. If you're on the call, let me know. So then we have, if you look at VNet A, there is virtual network A here. In the virtual network A, you have your subnet. Your subnet is 10.100/16. And then you have your resources, your servers that are being hosted here. Now, you also have another site here, which is, another VNet within the same subscription, right? And then it has its own subnet as well. And it has resources that are here. And for you to be able to pair these two networks, to allow VM here to talk to the VM here, you will need a gateway. Take it like you are configuring hybrid between your on-premises and the cloud environment. So for the cloud environment, you need a gateway there that you will configure, like a VPN gateway that you will configure to talk to your on-premises environment. So that's why you are seeing this. So this is a hub virtual network. The person connecting or linking these two network together. So we provide, once you create the network, you have full connectivity between the two environments. So you can now use routing and firewalls or NSG to now restrict who in this subnet can talk to who in this subnet. So that's that. So now, like we said, it is very easy to create VNet VNet pairing in Azure. It is very, very easy to create VNet pairing in Azure. I say it's easy, but we'll see maybe during the configuration or the demonstration aspect of it. So this also, it wasn't there initially. It was something that was introduced based on several requests from. Okay, somebody asking questions or speaking. Okay, thank you. Please mute if you're not speaking. Let me put my Hosting side by side. I can know when someone is asking question. A minute, please. Mm, all right. So when it comes to creating VNet pairing, so one of the things we have to do is we have said we have to create a virtual network. That's you have to create two virtual networks separate from each other, like from the previous slide, we were able to see it. Then configure the different setting that will allow the pairing to work. So this is VNet 1, for instance. Look at the setting under it. We'll give it a name. Then the thing we need to configure there is to allow VNet to access the paired virtual network. Only the paired virtual network that is going to be accessing. Yes, you can. Somebody's asking a question. Does it mean that VNet pairing is implemented when the resources are deployed in different regions? So by default, when the resources are deployed in different regions, they cannot talk to each other, right? They are isolated from each other. So in order for them to now talk to each other, then you need to configure what we call VNet pairing. Oh, Zoom. This is presentation. Is it not clear? Somebody is asking me to zoom in. I don't understand. I'm not showing. I'm showing slides. Sorry.
It's actually clear.
Okay, thank you.
It's clear. Yeah.
All right, thanks. So now one of the things we need to do is also to configure what we call forwarded traffic setting. Like what we have here. This will receive forwarded traffic from the VNet. So what is happening is when the resource is trying to access a request, is trying to request information or send information to a resource in another VNet. What it does is it sends that request to its own gateway. And then the gateway receive the request and look, on its own, there's what we call routing table. You look into its routing table. Routing table is like a list for network devices. It's like a list of addresses that says, if I want to get to this particular IP address, I need to go through this interface, or I need to go through this IP to be able to get there. So you look into his routing table and check, this resource, this destination IP address that you want to send this information to is not within our own VNet, is somewhere else, but I have a way, or I have a route to get to that other VNet. Then you take that information and forward it to the VNet it is paired to see, to be able to see. Then when you show, there are things you'll be able to see. You will see things like connected. It's just like router. This pairing or the gateway work just like router. When you go to your router and you say show route, even your computer, if you go and say show route using command prompt, it will show you certain link or IPs, and then it will tell you whether they are connected or not connected. So that's the same way you are going to see when you start configuring your VNet pairing. So determining the service chain use cases, right? One of the things that you want to do is to leverage what we call user-defined routes and user-defined routes when you are configuring your virtual network. Why do we say that? Remember, we said in the previous slide, once you configure a VNet to VNet, all communication is allowed. That means anything can reach anything within the two VNet. So now, what if the intention is not to allow just anything to pass and reach anything? I want a situation whereby just server 1 in VNet 3 is able to talk to server 3 in VNet 2, right? So I will have to do what we call custom routing to say, permit this particular IP address. Remember, in one of the course, we talk about a network security group, which I think is last week as well. Network security group is like a firewall that allow you to be able to create rules, firewall rules, like allow and deny, or permit and deny rules within the on the firewall to allow traffic to either pass through or be dropped. So that's the same way it works. So you have to use what we call user-defined routes to be able to permit services across the virtual network. Then you need to implement, like we said, you need a hub. So if you look at, there's a topology type they call hub and spoke. Hub and spoke is a situation where you have, let's take it like the primary data center. You now have your branches. Take these other people, take them as your branches. So now people in branch A need to talk to access a resource, that a server that you set up in branch B. There's an application that they are supposed to all be sharing. For them to go, they cannot just go just because there's a connection. They cannot just go from branch A or VNet A straight to VNet B. They need to go through what we call the hub. So each of the branch, in this case, each of these other VNet, they are called the spoke. While the VNet that is doing the connectivity, that is doing the intermediary between them, is called the hub. So that's where the hub and spoke come in. So which means at every point in time, traffic from VNet 1, before it can reach VNet 3, must first go through to VNet, to the hub VNet. Is the hub VNet's responsibility to now forward that traffic to VNet 3. It enables you to, yes, like we said, service chaining and custom routing enable you to direct the traffic from one virtual network to another virtual network, or from one virtual gateway in a paired network through your user-defined route that you have. Okay, so let's quickly check. Let's quickly check. Yes. Somebody say the hub is acting like gateway. Each of the VNet have their own gateway, but the hub is now like a master gateway that is doing the routing across the other virtual gateway. So let's look very quickly. I'm going to bring up my Azure environment. What's going on here? Hopefully you load well. Don't know why it's giving me. Let me try again. Okay. So go to my subscription. I'm not sure if I have any resource in this environment. Let's see. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. The subscription here. Do I have subscription? It's just like that. Okay, yeah. We have subscription here. So I'm going to zoom this page. Control plus. I think it's clear enough, right? Please just indicate if it's clear. Can you see the screen well?
Yes, it's clear.
All right, thank you. Okay, so here is my subscription. I'm not sure if I think this is a new subscription, so I don't have anything here right now. So I'm just going to quickly create I'm going to quickly create two resource group. Or one resource group is okay. Let's say it's within the same region we are going to be using it. So let's say, what's region? If we look at the global, which one we're doing?
Hi, Titi.
Yes, I'm with you.
I was wondering which you create first. Is it your resource group or your storage when spinning up your Azure environment?
So the first thing, if we are talking about peering, right? The first thing you need to do is to create your network first. Your network needs to be set up first. Then you can start creating resources. So I'm just going to do, let me just call it TT so I can know this is the lab. Region, we are going to use the same region. Usually use West Europe. It says closer to us. So those are some of the things you have to consider when you are creating resources. The closest region to your users or to the users that's going to be using the services.
I thought you had one in Africa.
We do. We have one in South Africa, and I heard they are trying to spin up another one. It's still more in Africa, but one in South Africa. Now, there's a limitation to the South Africa one. It's not all resources that you can get there. So you are still forced to go to another region outside of Africa. So the first thing I'm going to do now is to create to create a virtual network.
Sorry, ma. Please, what was the resource that you created just now? The one you created before this VNet?
That was resource group.
Okay, ma. Okay, ma.
Yes, that was resource group. Okay. Okay, so our trainer is around, but let me just see what I can do. Just want to take over in 5 minutes time. Virtual network, let's say VNet, VNet 1, West Europe. Click next. Security, let's just leave the security as basic for now. And we go next. Now this IP address. So you get to define your own IP address. You can change it. It doesn't have to be what Microsoft have given to you. You can change it. So in this case, maybe we can do 1 dot, and you can also reduce the slash. You see the number of the available IP address that is going to be given you. If you don't have need for this much, you can actually reduce it. So if I want to do, for instance, I want to reduce it to like /23, for instance, /23. So this is fine. Then that's my default subnet. So I can call this, I can give it another name, and I can leave it as that. It doesn't matter. So I can add other subnet if I want. It has created one subnet for me. I can add other subnets if I want. So next is tag. I'm not sure if we talk about tagging, and then we say next, validate, and we can click create. Hi, Tosin. Can you take up from here?
Hello, can you continue? Can you
Okay.
continue? Okay, finish this
All right. No problem.
creating and network pajamas. Thank you.
Okay. Hope my internet doesn't stay too long to respond to me. Oh, okay. So I will disable one, then I can create. Once the VNet is done creating, we can quickly create a virtual machine in this environment, and then we'll create another virtual network and create a VM as well. So just in case we are not able to, like I said, because Tosin was trying to sort out some things, that's why I have to jump in. There's lab, as you're all aware, at the end of every class, there's lab for us to try our hands on, because if the internet is kind of too slow, it might slow us down. And we'll have a target for each session. So just bear with me. Set, I'll just go through the run through to see. Okay, so this is complete. So the next thing is in this virtual network, we are going to create a VM in this environment now. So a virtual machine. Yes, same West Europe, say VM1. VM1, and we are okay with the zone and the size, security, the size, and OS is 20, let's pick 2019. 2019. Then to manage the size, because of our credits, I'm going to look for something very small. Because of the way it's white, it's not giving me the full. Sorry, just to get the costing. Okay. This ones are too high. Looking for something that will not Talk too much of our money. What is going on? Okay. Okay, so let's pick this username. So now for networking, this is where we need to select. See, it has already picked our VNet one, and as you configure a public IP here for it, and then we're okay. Since it has picked it, I can go ahead now and say create. Unfortunately, we cannot. While one action is going on, you have to wait before you can continue any other action. Oh, sugar. I think this is Tosin, I think we should continue because this will take time. It's going to take quite some time.
Okay.
It's going to take quite. It's taking
Yeah.
time. Maybe it's my internet. It's not slow. It's not so fast for me. So, guys, please, I'm really sorry about this. I'm trying to do it, but because of the slowness, otherwise we are not going to be able to cover a lot of things that we need to cover today, like we said. So Tosin is going to continue from here, but she will continue from the deck, or where she want to continue from, in case she's not continuing from this
Okay,
lab.
endpoint.
Yes. So yes, endpoint. Okay. So don't worry. We're going to ensure you have all the hands-on access. And then I will announce to us at the end of the class, we have another goodies that has just reached, that has been given to us today for you, for the purpose of your learning. So don't worry. We are giving you all the resources that you have to be able to have hands-on. So thank you. Tosin, please, you can take it up from here. I will see if I can
Okay,
add
thank you very
others so that I'll
much.
just show them later.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
I owe you. Thank you. Like,
Thanks. Yeah.
even clap for you. You really did an amazing job. Thank you so much. You made my job so easy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, nice to have you. Nice to I think I should maybe showcase my face a bit so that you can know that it's not a mystery robot talking to you here. a human being. I believe we have some basic knowledge about network routing and what an endpoint. When we refer to endpoints, we mean hosts, computers, network. Simply said, a network is a link between two computers, two linking, communicating. So that's basically, I guess there's been a brief on from the beginning of this class. So I don't want to go back because of time. So now we'll start from network service endpoints uses. So this is Microsoft Learn. It's a, like she mentioned earlier, what Microsoft Learn does. What you can learn a whole lot here. And if you want to certify for many of the exams, Microsoft exams, you will need this. So this gives you a hands-on experience for a whole lot of things. So these are ways you can implement the hub virtual network. You can implement, like Titi had explained, and what it network does, resources outside. Then now we're talking about the VPN, outside your virtual private network. So one of it is hub and spoke network. Serves second one as a user-defined route and service chaining. Third one, service. We'll talk about user-defined route. So I'll just quickly explain. There are certain users you don't allow to pass through networks, right? And there are other users you allow through the whole virtual network. At the back of your mind, that you need to understand. There's like a filtering kind of, for example, sometimes structure for my office. We have, is it a ring? We have like VPN that enables a connect when you're connecting. What's the structure like? Because users in another country, or you're connecting a device. Talking about the types of network on the network. So, for example, I'm trying to use my system on networks, and I'm trying to get access to another network that is based in America. Yeah. So in this, so what I need to simply do is I can use a VPN that I keep to know as about extending pairing, extended pairing that is right far away. So one of the first things you need to note, I can also define and spoke the route. Let's talk about the route. It means the pathway. Thirdly, how traffic pass chaining. To go from A, the following diagram, does it go from B to C? Shows us an example of the whole big diagram here. VPN gateway goes like an NVA and VPN gateway. There's communication. The hub and from this virtual network is accessible to other virtual networks. There's communication from that via user-defined. There's also communication from this virtual network. Service chaining. So you see what this is. In the end, what you have is virtual network C and virtual network D are able to communicate. So this is how it works. Regardless of the fact that they are, when you have on different, this is what you have here. You have the whole virtual network, like she mentioned earlier. Is that clear? Then you have the VPN gateway. Let me go. Okay, let's go another. So many times you use the VPN gateway as a doorway to pass through this question here says an organization has 3 different data centers connected with a mesh wide area network. So like what I mentioned earlier about types of network, the mesh wide area network one, if you remember, one can connect locations, different locations. LAN connects local, one is wide area network. So sometimes when people say, as some of my friends will say, one is local, one is America, one is abroad, and the countries that we can jump to. Then the other one is local, Niger based, and all that. So as the Azure administrator, you need to implement on the on-premises infrastructure in Azure. So this is a lab scenario. Sometimes you get this kind of questions in the exam where they ask you have this data center and this other data center. For example, they say, okay, this, when we talk about wide area network, we're referring to the fact that they're in different locations, right? So they say country A or data center America wants to communicate with data center Nigeria. And data Nigeria data center Nigeria wants to also communicate to data center Kenya. So here in this scenario here, it says there are two offices, New York and Boston, in one region. And so, for example, the data center America can be in the same region with data center Kenya. Okay, no, that's not the best closest. So this is what we talk global pairing, right? So back to the question. The question says there's one office, Seattle, in another region. So look at this closely. You see subnets 10.5.0./24. This is /22. This is 10.52.00/22. Look at the numbers that's here. VNet 2. It's another VNet. Look at this here. This is VNet 0. And this is RG1. So this clearly is, they are different, they're on different VM machines, clearly. But we're trying to ensure that this, despite the fact that they're in different locations and on different VM machines, they're able to communicate and they're able to share common information globally. So this is one of the reasons why we have people are able to work in Nigeria and have offices in different countries of the world, and their country A is working with country B, and information is being shared, like in my company, where there's a lot of data and information that passes across each single day between countries, regardless of time. So, and to enable this, one of the methods or one of the ways in which this can happen is through pairing, like she mentioned earlier, and it's a method. And then all the offices need to be networked together so they can share information. This simulation focuses on the connectivity of the offices and not creating the individual Azure resources. So you look at this label here, RG1, this is 104.505 RG1, this is 104.05 RG1, all this. They are all in the same resource group. But look down, Azure 104.5, VNet 2, VNet 0, VNet RG1, they're all in different VNets. But on a normal day, VNets are not supposed to communicate. But in this case, it has been made in such a way to communicate. What are the objectives? What are the objectives here? I just want to go through this scenario because I'm trying to explain the scenario properly so that when we're solving it, we can understand better how best to connect. So task 1 says create the infrastructure environment. Create the infrastructure environment. What's the infrastructure environment? That's where we did. That's what she taught you earlier when she created the VNs, virtual networks. In this task, you deploy 3 virtual machines. Virtual machines are deployed in different regions and virtual networks. Use a template to create the virtual networks and virtual machines in the different regions. You can view the lab templates. Okay, let me view this lab template. That's what she was about to create. That was the virtual machine that was hanging all the time. Okay, so this is what it will look like once it's created. So this is, so you have this here, content version. Mhm. Pages build and deployment. Okay. It's going far into coding. This is one of these are interactive simulation files, but this is not what I wanted to share. Let me go back to the yeah. So these are templates that on your own you can practice later. You can use them to create you use a template to create the virtual networks and virtual machines in different regions. Like Titi had created, I saw she had created a virtual machine.
Is this where TT? Is this where you went onto the marketplace and you looked for the virtual machine template to create? Is this what she's trying to do right now, or is this something different?
Okay, so this topic now is for, it's still, they are kind of interrelated. So the first part that I did says we have to create a virtual machine. That's in the process of creating the peer-to-peer, pairing the network together. So you need to create a virtual machine. So this is also this a kind of step forward to say after creating the virtual machine, you now start configuring the custom routing, the endpoint routing, routing between the two endpoints that is hosted in the two virtual machine virtual network environment. So you can choose. They are just more like giving you, just in case you have not created those VM in the first task, you can continue from here. But if you have already created the VM in the first task and you have created the network, it's just to continue with the other aspect of the activities in this lab.
Okay, quick question. If you already created one virtual machine in a network, is it possible to like duplicate it or somehow like without having to go through the entire steps? Does it work
No,
like
no, no,
that
no.
or work like
No.
that?
So you can't duplicate a virtual machine. You have to. You can. I think you can. Can you clone it? It's just to spin up another one. If you have fast internet, it doesn't take time, like it did
Oh,
for mine because of my internet. So if you have fast internet, it doesn't take time to spin up. And the other thing is when you have virtual machine already, because of the subscription that you are using, it might be limited in terms of credit. So maybe when you finish a particular task, it's advisable you kind of delete it to free your credit for another set of lab. So that's one of the advice there. As against having multiple virtual machines, if you're not using one again, just create another one. And if you already have one, if the task is also saying create virtual machine, then you can just use the same virtual machine. The only place where it will be a challenge on this kind of lab is your virtual machine, your virtual network supposed to be existing while you are creating VM so that you can select the virtual network. So if you create a VM after, if you create a VNet after creating a virtual machine, it might be difficult for you to now associate that VNet to the virtual machine, except I will check if that improvement has come now. I don't know if you get where I'm going, what I'm saying.
okay, so you're saying you have to first create the virtual machine, or that's how it was previously. You'd had to first create the machine and then create the VNet and assign it to it. That's
No,
how
you
it
have to first create the VNet. You notice I created the VNet first. Create
okay.
the VNet first, so that when you are creating your virtual machine, you can select your VNet that the virtual machine should make use of that VNet. Do you understand?
Oh, all right, I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have other people's hand up.
Okay.
I saw Sarukayat.
Yes,
So
thank you
my
so much,
question was
ma'am.
about my question was about spinning up new VMs when you don't have need of the old ones again. I did remember Sarah talked about deploying templates. So I was wondering if you can use a template rather than spin up a new one. Thank you.
Yes. So the template, each time you use your template, is provisioning the resources. The resources are already there once you run the template task, right? So when you now finish the virtual machine, finish the use of it, okay, you can configure the template in a way to now say, okay, that will do the task of deleting virtual machine that is not in use. But that you have to be very careful so that you don't go and delete what you are still using. So that's in one way. The other way you can use the template.
Yeah.
I believe.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
You're welcome. Rukaya.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question.
So I just wanted clarity on this task that we are working on. Are you saying we are skipping just task one, or we are skipping everything altogether? Because I know we've not configured the local and global VNet pairing and inter-site connectivity, but we only set up the VM. So are we skipping everything altogether or just task one? Thank you.
Nowhere.
No.
Okay. Should we?
So I think, Tosin, do you have your virtual machines already created? Or
Created
how?
on this account is not. So there are new accounts. So I would have to create one on this. I opened one that I had created here. But
Yeah, I think we can still, go over everything together. I don't know if others agree, but I still feel like, because there are some things on the VM that is not clear to me that I would love that to explain, like the availability and all of that. I don't know if it's possible for us to go through it together again.
Okay, so we can. The purpose of doing a few demonstration in the class is just to quickly show you how it works. And like we said, there's lab guide for you at the end of the day. However, now when they say create virtual machine, the task really here is not about creating virtual machine. The task is about pairing the network. So, but when you finish pairing the network, you need to be able to test that your pairing worked. Actually, that's the reason why we are now creating virtual machine, to be able to test at the end of the day. Say, I don't know that you understand, but yes, we can go through it together. So what we are also trying to do is to see how we can fast track the session so that we can cover what we have for today. And then the lab, like I used to do, I can stay an hour after the class. So anybody that have questions, if you want to share your screen or you ask a question, I can quickly share my screen and then we go through it together. So that's another way. So which one? I think it's Tosin that will help us decide. Yeah, Tosin, what's your take?
Well, I'm also aware of the fact that some people cannot learn. They have to go over something several times before they grab it. So I understand everybody's not the same. We don't learn the same at the same pace. But what I think we should focus on is understanding the logic, or should I say the theory for now,
The
and then
concept.
the concepts. Yeah. So because I'm thinking of, because I see that we still have like 4 more areas to cover. So I don't know. I'm thinking, I don't know, Titi, do you think we have do you think we have the time for, but okay. It's 12:30, so we can handle. Okay, so then the next part, the second task, to create a local and global network, virtual network pairing, which is what Titi had shown you, and then create a local virtual network pairing between the two networks in the same region. So what happens is just that the selection you choose when you're pairing, like that part where we go to the IP address. So you see this part here, this is where actually you now have to come here and do some changes, make some changes, so that what this virtual network here can be able to see the other virtual network as we have as I showed in this task here. Just create the virtual network pairing between the two. And what it means is sometimes you can choose to use the IPs that they will be able to access each other, like it's seen here in this diagram here. In this case, they didn't use the IPs, they used the naming. You can see the naming here, the virtual machine names 104, 105, RG1, the resource group. And they also use the resource group, which is RG1, as a definition to pair, as a, should I say, they use it as a characteristic for the pairing in this case. So I'll quickly run through these parts and then implement inter-site connectivity. Sometimes I like to do these questions here on this to sort of like test our knowledge of the last topic, and if you are following some of the things that we've talked about. So one of the questions here says, when virtual networks are successfully paired, what's the pairing status for both virtual networks in the pairing? Anybody? Okay, let me go over this again. Your company is implementing an Azure virtual network pairing solution, as Titi had taught you, the pairing solution to enable connectivity between virtual networks. You're working on the plan to support shared access to gateways. So there are two things that you are sharing: gateways and resources. And to control internet communication. Question: a few teams submitted questions and configuration requests for your input. One is the IT team needs information about how to check the virtual network pairing status and verify paired connections. Secondly, the marketing department has resources in virtual networks in different regions. What we have here is connected. My screen is a bit, because I enlarged it, so sometimes I have to scroll through the configuring Azure. This is where we started from. I'll just do a refresher because I feel like maybe we are not understanding this part. So determine Azure virtual network pairing uses. One of the things you need to know, see how it works. The virtual network 1, virtual network 2, virtual network 3. Virtual network pairing happens between these two, this one and this one. Look at the region. Region 2, region 1. You've connected it in such a way that you change the parameters and you configured it that region 2 and region 1 are now able to communicate via virtual network pairing. So here it goes on to say regional virtual network pairing connects Azure virtual networks that exist in the same region. So like Titi had selected before about the region, when, if you remember the part where she mentioned about virtual machines, and she talked about the region closest to you, and she said West Europe. So in this case, regional virtual network pairing connects Azure virtual networks that exist in the same region. So if West Europe is the closest region, like to us in Nigeria, if we're now connecting we're connecting a regional virtual network pairing, what we'll have to do is look for another virtual network that is close, probably Kenya, to the same West Europe, which we had selected before. And we'll select, so maybe Kenya has their network as, maybe their resource name or their resource group is RG2. And we in Nigeria are RG1. So what we can do is we create a connection that would connect Azure virtual networks that are in the same region. That is what is called the regional virtual network pairing. That is Kenya and Nigeria. We're connecting our two virtual networks together. That is the regional virtual network pairing. Then when we talk about the global virtual network pairing, we're connecting regions, networks that exist in different regions. Note the word, in different regions. So we're not dealing with the same region any longer. As you can see in this diagram here, there's region 1, there's region 2. So if we were to create a virtual network now for region 1 and region 2, it means that we have to create a form of connection that will enable region 1 and region 2. Say region 1, for example, we say region 1 is West Europe. Region 2, as we saw when we were creating the virtual machines, region 2 is East Europe. So when we try to say, okay, we will connect the networks, the virtual networks that are under the West Europe, and connect them to the virtual networks that are under East Europe. And we create a system, which is the method, which is the global virtual network pairing. And this goes on. You can create a regional pairing of virtual networks in the same Azure public cloud region, or in the same China cloud region, or in the same Microsoft government cloud region. So what this is just options you can select when you are creating these things. You can create virtual networks in different Azure government cloud regions. So a global pairing of virtual networks in different Azure government cloud regions isn't permitted. So these are the things you need to consider when you are creating an Azure VN pairing. One is private network connections, strong performance, simplified communication, seamless data transfer, no resource disruptions. So if I connect Kenya and Nigeria, for example, I have to ensure that the private network connection, the network traffic is private. The traffic between the virtual networks is kept on the Microsoft Azure backbone network. It's not kept on another public network. So, and secondly, I have to ensure that there's a strong performance between the infrastructure, that means low latency. That's the bandwidth. So for example, the other day we were trying to connect, we had an issue in one of our offices in Angola. And so we're trying to connect a virtual machine. So we connected to the virtual machine remotely using remote desktop to connect to the other VM in Angola. But because we are in the same virtual network, which is West Africa. That's how my company puts it, or rather in my office, that's how we put it. That's West Africa. So because of that reason, we had to ensure that the bandwidth that was passing through Nigeria to Angola is the same bandwidth that Angola is getting, is the same. So we had to, even us in Nigeria, we had to increase our bandwidth. When I mean bandwidth, it's the speed and the latency, latency of your transmission of communication. So we have to increase that on our end so that we can communicate properly with Angola, the Angola office, because of what we were trying to transfer. And because of the Azure, because we were already on the Azure virtual network, and we're trying to do some core infrastructure changes that had to do with some domain names and some server changes. So because of that reason, we had to ensure that there was high, strong performance So these are some of the reasons why these are the key points to consider when you are using Azure Virtual Network Peering. No resource disruption, seamless data transfer, that as you are transferring, you don't get errors, you don't have issues. So the next one, determine gateway transit and connectivity. Okay, so I think I skipped this part because I thought you guys had done this part. So when virtual networks are paid, you can configure Azure VPN gateway in the paired virtual network as a transit point. In this scenario, a paired virtual network uses the remote VPN gateway to gain access to other resources. So what it means is that if I want to gain access to, okay, let me just use this diagram. Let me not. I wanted to use real life scenarios. For example, if I know we're not all Nigerians, so I'm trying to look for a common term. So if I want to go from Nigeria to Kenya, I'm trying to pass the network through maybe fiber. I've used the fiber connection. I can decide and say when virtual networks are paired, I configure my Azure VPN gateway to have in the paired network as a transit point. So what it means is that it serves, I don't know if I can show you something, it's just that, anyway, I don't want to violate company policy. Okay, so I was about to show you an example of something, what this part is actually referring to and how it's created. But again, I'm like, I don't want to violate my company policy of sharing data. But so I would just explain it this way as a transit point. So Azure VPN gateway is a transit point. It's a point of, let's say, a passageway. As you well know what a VPN is. So I'll skip this part. The VPN gateway is configured to allow the VPN gateway transit virtual network B accesses resources in the hub. In the hub, I heard someone asking about what a hub is. So remember, so the virtual network. So it says the virtual network B accesses resources in the hub, including the gateway subnet, by using remote VPN gateway. So this remote VPN gateway is the method through which access is being given. So resources is being accessed. So if I'm in Nigeria here, I can access computers in America. I can access computers in Angola simply because not accessing them, accessing even resources, not just accessing them to just see what they're doing, but even their resources. I can have access to resources that are not common to me because of this method. Okay, things to know about Azure VPN Gateway. It's implemented with the Azure Virtual Network Pairing. So whenever you're doing a VN, sorry, I'll just use the short form VN, Virtual Network Pairing, note that you need to take a closer look at Azure VPN Gateway. That's where it is implemented, excuse me. A virtual network can have only one VPN gateway. Note this, a virtual network can have only one VPN gateway. You see that example here. We have only one VPN gateway. Allow VPN gateway transit. Only one. Let's move on. When you allow VPN gateway transit, the virtual network can communicate to resources outside the pairing. In our sample illustration, the subnet gateway, the subnet gateway within the hub virtual network can complete tasks such as use a site-to-site VPN to connect to an on-premises network, use a VNet to VNet connection to connect virtual network, use a point-to-site VPN to connect to a client. So if my office is in Nigeria and I say I want to connect to another of my office in Lagos, I can use a VPN to connect to on-premises network because we are all on the same company network. I can also use a VNet to connect to another virtual network. So if I want to connect to another network that is in my region, for example, in Kenya too, let me use the example. Why is Kenya? Why is Kenya? Okay, so I can decide and say that VNet to VNet connection to another virtual network. And I can say, okay, I want to connect to the VNet in Kenya. So I set up my own VNet here and I connect it to the one in Kenya. Point to site VPN to connect to a client. So I can decide that my computer in this house or in this office can connect to a certain client. Maybe the client is in America, and I can say, let this gateway, subnet gateway, serve as the access point through which we can connect. So I'll give you a real life scenario. So I don't know how many of you remember the time when Nigeria, they banned Twitter and people were using VPNs. In the same way, you can have VPN gateway transits where for companies as an organization like my company has, so each time I'm outside the office and I want to use my company laptop, I have to log in through a VPN gateway that sits on a VM that is locally for my region. So sometimes it connects me through London, and then from London, I see the progression. It takes me to the American office if I want to access certain resources that are locally on our company server. So for example, the other day we were trying to do some things on our DevOps Azure, and we're doing it outside of our office location, outside the office network. So what we did was we connected to the VPN, and the VPN connected us to the London office, and then connected from London to America. So that kind of connection, usually we had a gateway transit that allows paired virtual networks to share the gateway and get access to resources. With this implementation, you do not need to deploy a VPN gateway in the pair virtual network. Here, it's explaining the way gateway transits work. Let me go back to the diagram. Here, you can see the routes here. Gateway transits, allow VPN gateway transits. So gateway transits allows paired virtual networks to share the gateway and access to resources. So we have a resource which we use. Sometimes we use, we have certain resources that, like a content manager, that can serve as a resource that is common to our office. For example, we have a logistics platform that is common to every company across board. And we decided, okay, to create a gateway transit so that the American office, the Nigerian office, how do you think companies like UPS and yes, UPS works? They work with network set up like this, gateway transits, that allows you to be in UPS office in Nigeria. You can access resources in You can gain information about UPS in America. You can even apply, you can check, you can track, you can monitor certain things that are in American office. Just put maybe the material number and the details of the item you're trying to track. So I'll quickly, there's quite a lot in this module, but I just wanted to quickly go back to that. So when we create a virtual network pairing, things to know about creating virtual network pairing is that when we go to the Azure portal, we have to ensure that the Azure account must be assigned to the network contributor or a classic network contributor role. So you have to also ensure that the permission for that account is someone who has access to creating an account of that nature. I'll leave this for you to go back and also go through it. Creating a pairing, you need 2 virtual networks. So when we talk about this pairing, you don't just you can't just set it up with 1 network. It's two things are involved. And usually they say the other one that you're using in pairing is usually the remote network. I would advise you also go through some of these materials here. So, okay, let's quickly go over this now. How to check your pairing status. First things first, when you have deployed your pairing status, you've paired your network through your gateway. So sometimes you can set the gateway to carry an IP address that is, let me see, need the public IP here. This example here, I wanted to show the slide, but for deployment with the Azure Resource Manager in the Azure portal, hope you know that this is what we call the Azure portal. This is the Azure portal where you create a virtual machine. I don't know if you can see. Can you see the slide? And create a virtual machine. The next part is for deployments. Let me go to the beginning. Note this word. Your pairing isn't successfully established until both VNs in the pairing have a status of connected. So it means VN1 and VN2 that you have created have a status. That's when you check the status from this place here. You can see on that VN. This VN is not created, so it's not. I can't show you a sample. I have to create one now. Take some time. Okay. So when you create an initial pairing to the second VN for the first VN, the pairing status for deployment with the Azure Manager, Azure Resource Manager, the 2 primary status conditions are initiated and connected. For the classic deployment model, the updating status condition is also used. So for the classic deployment model, this updating status condition is also used. So the 2 primary status conditions that determine, this is like where you check your pairing status. The conditions are initiated or connected. So when I say how do you check your pairing status, how do you know that the 2 VNs are being paired? You check for initiated and connected. When you create the initial pairing to the second, which is the remote virtual network from the first virtual network, the pairing status for the first virtual network is initiated. When you create the subsequent pairing from the second virtual network to the first virtual network, the pairing status for both the first and remote virtual network is connected. In the Azure portal, you can see the status for the first virtual network change from initiated to connected. From initiated to connected. I'll quickly run through this. So extend peering with user defined routes and service chaining. So this is where we started from, things to know about extending peering. So here we'll just quickly run through. Virtual network peering is non-transitive. The communication capabilities in the peering are available to only the virtual networks and resources in the peering. Other mechanisms have to be used to enable traffic to and from resources and networks outside the private network peering network. Suppose you have three virtual networks. Suppose you have three virtual networks. So like we had done earlier on how to create virtual networks. So you have virtual network A, virtual network B, and virtual network C. You establish virtual network pairing between virtual network A and B. And then you now also do between networks B and C. And you don't set up any connection between A and C. So imagine you have connection between A and B, B and C, but there's no connection between A and C. So the virtual network pairing capabilities that you set up between networks B and C don't automatically enable pairing communication capabilities between A and C. So what it means is that whatever you have between B and C that is connected, you said A and B are connected, B and C are connected, but A and C are not connected. So what this means is that automatically you don't get capabilities shared amongst the two different virtual networks. So like we earlier said, ways that we can extend the capabilities of our pairing for resources and virtual networks outside their pairing network. So these are ways when you can, that's like you are extending pairing, you are making it to perform more than it usually would do. You're enlarging your coast. Let me put it that way. You're enlarging your coast. You are spreading your tentacles in a very, so if you intend to do something like that, capabilities of pairing for resources and virtual networks outside your pairing network. One of the ways, or some of the ways, one is hub and spoke networks, user-defined routes, service chaining. So like we saw here, and let me just quickly expand table. So the hub and spoke network, when you deploy a hub and spoke network, the hub virtual network can host infrastructure components like the non-virtual appliance, which is the NVA, or the Azure VPN gateway. So sometimes if you're wondering, where can I put my Azure VPN gateway? You have to think of which mechanism would work best for your Azure VPN gateway, the hub and spoke network. Then we have the user-defined route. Virtual network pairing enables the next hop in a user-defined route to be the IP address of a virtual machine in the paired virtual network or gateway. Then we have service chaining. Service chaining is used to direct traffic from one virtual network to a virtual appliance or gateway. A user-defined route defines the paired networks. So look at the user-defined routes. They said it defines. That means it's the one that determines how the thing will pass, how traffic will pass. The reason I'm emphasizing this word, how traffic will pass, is that when you are building a network that has to do with different locations, you have to think of how network will pass, how traffic will pass. Let me not say how network will pass like a market zone or traffic. How, let me put like how road will take be. That's the best way. How road will take be. I don't want to say yes, how road will take be, because what I'm saying is what is the best path that your traffic, what is the best route that your internet or your internet, for example, your resources will pass to get to the users or the clients. So this is the lab scenario like we did earlier. Let me just quickly run through, because I see that we have, it's already 1 o'clock. Wow. Shy. I just hope we can finish. Okay, so back to this question here. Now, I believe somebody can answer this. When virtual networks are successfully paired, what is the thing you find? What is that thing you seek for to know that your virtual network has been successfully paired? That's what this question is asking. So it says choose the best response for each of the following and check your answers. Okay, anybody? Okay. What approach enables paired virtual networks to share the gateway and get access to resources? What approach? Your gateway transit. How is Azure virtual network pairing best described? Traffic between virtual networks is kept on the Microsoft backbone network. Virtual network pairing disrupts other resources. Paired virtual networks must be in the same region. They don't have to be in the same network. Hey, what am I clicking? In this module, you learned virtual network pairing lets you connect virtual networks in a hub and spoke topology. You learned how to configure. Let's go back to that one now. Let me go back to surface training. Okay, module. The next part we'll be looking at is, I'm sorry I have to rush because of the time we have on this, because we want to also do some practicals. So the next part, Azure system routes to is what we call Azure system routes. How to configure routes and endpoints. Things to know about system routes. So what you need to know is the route table contains a set of rules called routes that specifies how packets should be routed in a VM. So we have what we call routing tables. It records information about the system routes.
Sorry, it's not showing your screen. You are not on the page. Yeah. What we are saying is keep up the great work or something. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so can you see this? So I'll just quickly, basically just give a small scenario of how this works. System routes. So it's like when you are a post office and you send a letter to Lagos and you're in another part of, say you're in Abuja. Let me just narrow it to Nigeria, or let me use say you are in London and you want to send a mail to the post office to America. So you're thinking of how you would. So what this does is that there's a routing table. It checks. It checks like what they call that's going to be like your pathway. That's going to be like the road through which the mail will take the post office, from the post office to maybe the post office in Ghana, maybe the post office to you from London. It will take to the post office in different parts of Turkey. How does the flight go again? From Turkey to sometimes there are countries they bypass and then you go to America. But bottom line is what I'm trying to explain is the fact that the routes that you take can determine the routing table is like a set of rules that determines the road, the pathway in which information is being shared, packets. So it will take this mail. Imagine the packets are like mails. Should I say they're like letters that we used to write back in the day. It will take the mail and pass through a certain pathway. And then so the routing table determines which pathway the 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 mail will take, or the routing table determines the pathway which the mail will take to get to America from Nigeria, for example, or from London. So the business scenario here is, so when matching a route, it can't be found, the packet is dropped. So if they send you a letter to an address in America and they don't find the person that letter is meant for to that address, it's possible they'll return back the letter back to the post office. Many times it has happened. The letter is returned back to the post office because the user or the person, the addressee or the name that was written, the person was not available. So the packet is dropped. In this case, that's what happens in network. So the business scenario, suppose you have a virtual network with 2 subnets. In this configuration, you can use Azure system routes to control communication between the subnets and between subnets and the internet. The front end subnet can use a system route to access the internet. A back end subnet can use a system route to access the front end subnet. Both subnets access a route table. This is what we mean. This is the front end subnet. This is the back end subnet. See what it does. It passes through a system route. This is like where they check. The system checks. Oh, is this person who he says he is? Or is this side who they say they are? And it comes to the routing table and checks the address. Does this correspond with what this is supposed to have? So when you check this is what sometimes it has, this part of when they say authentication happens, because it checks through the subnets and the IP addresses. And sorry, I have a bit of flu. So so what happens here is that it checks the routing table to determine the best way to follow so that the packet is not discarded. So when it checks the routing table, it comes like this and goes like that. This also checks the routing table, comes like this, and goes through the front end subnet. So notice that everything comes through the front end subnet. But one thing they have in common is that they check the routing table to ensure that they know the right path to take. Things to know about user-defined routes. User-defined routes. When we talk about user-defined routes, we're actually referring to control network traffic by defining routes that specify the next hop of the traffic flow. So sometimes when we talk about traffic flow, what we're referring to in networking most times is how information is being passed, how data is moving from computer A to computer B, how transmission of information occurs. So the next hub can be one of the greatest following targets. We have virtual network gateway, virtual network, internet, network virtual appliance. These are some of the targets. Similar to system routes, UDRs control user-defined routes. That's what UDRs are. User-defined routes also access routing tables, route tables. Each route table can be associated to multiple subnets. Each subnet can be associated to only one routing table only. There are no charges for creating routing tables in Microsoft Azure. This is business scenario. Suppose you have a virtual machine that performs a network function like routing, firewalling, WAN optimization. We'll talk about this WAN routing optimizations. You want to direct certain subnet traffic, and you are trying to say, okay, I hope you understand the part of IP addressing a bit here. Let me know where I'm coming from, please. I hope you know subnets. Are you following? I hope you are not sleeping, please. To direct certain subnet traffic to the NVA, we have to accomplish this configuration. We have to place an NVA between subnets, between one subnet and the internet. So this is what happens here. You can see this user-defined route here. This is another user-defined route here. Then this is a back-end subnet. This is a virtual machine NVA IP forwarding. So let me explain the scenario again. Suppose you have a virtual machine that performs a network function like routing, firewalling, or WAN optimization. You want to direct certain subnet traffic to the NVA. Where is the NVA? See where the NVA is, virtual machine stroke NVA IP forwarding. Virtual machine stroke NPA IP forwarding. Notice where it is at. It connects to the back end subnet. It also connects to the front end subnet. Then to accomplish this configuration, you place an NVA between subnets, and between one subnet and the internet. The subnet can use a UDR to access NVA and then the internet. The subnet can use another UDR, user-defined route, and NVA to access the back end. So you see, one can come like this, one can come like this. That's what this illustration communicates to us. So sometimes in the exam, you will be asked to define a user route. Show a user-defined route for how the NVA IP can be configured from the front end or from the back end. This is the answer. It's configured. You can configure the subnets using another UDR and NVA to access the back end. See what they did here. The user-defined routes. They created another user-defined route to access this back-end subnet. So this is determine service endpoint users. So one of the things to know about service endpoints, they can extend your virtual network identity to your Azure services to secure your service resources. So what we mean by this is that the service endpoints can make sure that your Azure services is secured in a way. Your identity, because sometimes when people use Azure, some people talk about one of the things Azure has that is very good is security. And service endpoint can extend your VN identity to your Azure services. You can secure your Azure service resource to your virtual network by using virtual network rules. Virtual network rules can improve public internet access to resources and allow traffic only from your virtual network. So the reason why you have some of these rules, for example, I know many of us have been know that there's some offices you go to, internet, you cannot use your phone. Even if you were using your Wi-Fi, once you get into that space, you cannot use it. It means that they've set something that allows the traffic only from people within their space, the public internet access to resources. So there are places where you go and use their internet for free, or you just log in like airport Wi-Fi. This means that they've opened it up for you. They've removed some rules that allows access for you to be able to use their internet and even their resources. Sometimes when you use some of these airports, we gain access to some of their shopping things, platforms, and all those things, because they allow traffic only for your virtual network once you are within their location. Service endpoint also always takes service traffic directly from your virtual network to the service on the Microsoft Azure backbone network. The service endpoints are configured through the subnets. No extra overhead is required to maintain the endpoints. The following illustration shows a virtual machine connecting to an Azure service through a service endpoint. A virtual machine in a subset accesses an Azure storage account through a service endpoint. Last week, I presume you must have learned about the Azure storage account. The virtual network rules allows the virtual VM to access the Azure service resource, but not communicate with the internet. So here, see what we mean. So they gain access to the resource machine, but they don't communicate with the internet. This is the virtual machine. This is the endpoint, service endpoint. It allows virtual network subnet, allows on-premises access. Look at the Azure storage. I won't explain too much about that now, but I would next class. Things to consider when using service endpoints. I think this better explains itself when we do a practical of this part. Things to consider when using service endpoints. One of the things to consider is to consider improved security for resources, consider optimal routing for service traffic, consider direct traffic to the Microsoft network, consider easy configuration and maintenance. If you notice, in the last slides, we were talking about also the things to consider when doing pairing, when virtual network pairing, if you remember. Now we're talking about the service endpoints. They said the several scenarios using these endpoints can be advantageous because it gives you an increased security for resources, optimal routing for security traffic, direct traffic to the Microsoft network, easy configuration and maintenance. Determine service endpoint services. It's easy to add a service endpoint to the virtual network. In the Azure portal, you select the Azure service for which you create the endpoint. In this unit, we examine several services, including Azure Cosmos DB, Event Hub, Key Vault, SQL database. So these are some of the service endpoints. You have the Azure Active Directory, Azure Cosmos Database, Azure Cognitive Services helps you to, I think this is where the AI, we can add the AI functionalities here. Container Registry, Event Hub, Key Vaults, Service Bus, SQL for the database, the Active Directory for the users and the groups, the storage, backup, web servers, web applications, and the app service, Azure service. So the Azure storage is generally available in all regions. Azure SQL database and data warehouse is generally available in all Azure regions. Okay, the first one, the Azure storage, this endpoint gives traffic an optimal route to the Azure storage service. Each storage account supports up to 100 virtual networks. So you see what it does. This endpoint gives traffic an optimal route. So remember that we have what we call the routing table. Remember that on the routing table is where a selection of the routes occurs. And remember that the pathway through which it takes can happen through different methods. So now they're telling you that through the Azure storage, the traffic is given the optimal route to take for Azure storage service. The next one is generally available in all Azure regions. Is the database Azure SQL database warehouse. Like the word implies, a firewall security feature controls whether database accepts communication from particular subnets in virtual networks. This feature applies to database server for your single databases or elastic pool in SQL database. So what it does is that it pulls the unique identifiers. I want to believe that everybody in this class has some bits of knowledge of database and identifiers. When we talk of unique identifiers, what is unique? What is the name? What is the ID, tables, and schemas? So what this is, the firewall security feature controls whether the database accepts communication from particular subnets in virtual networks. So sometimes you find some devices you are trying to connect, you say not able to connect or not be able to authenticate. Sometimes it's because there's a communication, there's a lack of communication. So it's like you carrying, the postman carrying address, they wrote an address and he carries it to the wrong address. And simply because the database or the record he has shows him another record that he's not certain and he didn't confirm, and then the firewall serves as a form of security feature that directs to say, okay, this data, take it to this place, this data, take it to that side. That's what this does. So then Azure database for PostgreSQL and Azure database for MySQL. This are a bit technical. Virtual network service endpoints and rules extend the private address space of a virtual network to your Azure database and your SQL server. The next one is your Cosmos DB, generally available. You can configure the Azure Cosmos DB account to allow access only for specific, note the word, specific subnets. Specific subnets. So remember we talked about the ability for you to have different subnets in one virtual network. But here with the Azure Cosmos database allows you to have a specific subnet on that enables service endpoints to access Azure Cosmos DB on the subnet within a virtual network. Traffic from the subnet is sent to the Azure Cosmos DB with the identity of the subnet and the virtual network. After the Cosmos is enabled, you can limit access to the subnet by adding it to your Azure Cosmos DB account. So sometimes there are some addresses. I have witnessed this even in my office, that sometimes there's some links that not everybody has access to. Only managers have access to, but there are proprietary documents in those links. So this is some things you can set that creates limit access by the subnet. It's hosted on a server, or it's hosted on the network, but it has a subnet for that. So it's enabled with the Azure Cosmos database. In the Azure Key Vaults, we have the Azure Bus Service and Azure Event Hubs. The Key Vault allows to restrict access to a specified VM. The endpoint allows you to restrict access to a list of IP addresses ranges. So maybe you have IP addresses ranging from 10.196.192.10 to maybe 100. And these are version 4 addresses. The Azure Key Vault enables you to set. So it says any user connecting to this key vault from outside these sources is denied access automatically. So these are some of the control measures that network administrators can set in place. Microsoft network administrators can set in place. Because when you set up these kind of things, this Azure Key Vaults, Azure Cosmos DB, there are things is important you understand what it's used for. Why you what works for which. But the Azure Key Vaults works for IP address version 4. The Cosmos works with the subnets when you're trying to separate a subnet. The SQL database and data warehouse works as a firewall security. The storage works as a best storage practice for backups and effective for backup. And when you are backing up and monitoring. Then the Azure Bus Service Bus and Azure Event Hubs, generally available in all Azure regions. The integration of Service Bus with a virtual network service endpoint enables secure access to messaging capabilities from workloads like VM virtual machines that are bound to virtual networks. So when we talk about the workload, sometimes we're referring to what it processes, how much speed, bandwidth, or what happens on that network. What kind of what kind of pressure is put on that network. It's like what they say. There are some of us that when we're put under pressure, we break. That's why sometimes people who live in Lagos and some other parts of Nigeria behave certain ways. Because sometimes the pressure in the environment enables them to behave like that. So the integration of service bus with virtual network endpoints enables secure access to messaging capabilities from workloads like virtual. So you're able to gain access to some of the workloads and manage it that are bound to virtual. The network traffic path is secured on both ends. So I would quickly move on to the next. Identify private link users. What this does, the Azure private link and network routing configurations. Azure private link keeps all your traffic on the Microsoft global network. So the Azure private link keeps all your traffic on the Azure global network. There are no public internet access. So this is usually used for big multinationals, and so they keep the Azure private link such that there's no access for Microsoft global networks. they keep it on the Microsoft Global Network so that there's no access for public interference. There's no access for, maybe, for example, imagine a company like Facebook. They have what they call Azure Private Link to keep all the traffic that is coming from different countries on their Microsoft Global Network. It says there's no public internet access for some. That's for people that work there. So they probably, I bet you that if you become a staff of Facebook or any of these IT companies, they always have this kind of things, model set up that will prevent public internet access through their resources, because when people have access to some of their resources, a lot can happen. Private link is global and there are no regional restrictions. You can connect privately to services running in other Azure regions. So what this means is that I can use a private link and I say I want to go and connect to Russia, the way Donald Trump connected to Russia and got certain secret information, or the way Putin connected to America and helped his friend win, as the allegation says, not like it's true. I don't know if it's true, but as they say. So the private link is global. There are no regional restrictions. Once you have the private link, once you can set up an Azure private link, no restrictions. The world is at your feet. So services delivered on Azure can be brought into a private virtual network by mapping your network to a private endpoint. So mapping your network to a private endpoint means that the services that you want can be brought into your private. That's like you can narrow down on your services, that you want. So some people will say, oh, okay, I don't want this app to give me the service or of, I don't even want it to show history, past records of who has been, like Google, for example. We all go to Google, and sometimes people will say, okay, I don't want my children to see what I've browsed before, what I've done on this site, or what I've done previously. So services delivered on Azure can be brought into a private virtual network by mapping your network. Later on, we'll talk about some of these other things on how to map, although that's more technical into networking, how to map your network. But private links can deliver your own services in your customers' virtual networks. So I'm sure some of us have seen, you are browsing for something and then suddenly Google will just pop up with something, because maybe you've been browsing on shoes. I don't know how many ladies here can attest to that. You probably browsed on shoes today, tomorrow you browsed about shoes. So next tomorrow you find that Google will start to give you those, will start to present shoes before you, because they are delivering services by their customers' virtual network. So they deliver to you based on the virtual network. All traffic to the service can be routed through the private endpoint. No gateways, NAT devices, Azure Express Route or VPN connections, or public IP addresses are required. So we have the Azure private link, only access mapped resources. So when you have your computer, for example, like where we are now, you have the private endpoint configured. This is how this is just like the logical movement. Let me put it that way, the logical movement. That means that it's like the process that happens in the air. It may not, it's much of a spiritual move than a physical move. Let me put it that way. Much of a spiritual move than a physical move. So the private endpoint, and then the Azure private link only access mapped resources. So if a resources has not been mapped or has not been kept or protected like the way SQL has been kept in this box, the Azure private link will not send it. It will not put it, it will not pass it through. So these are some of the reasons why sometimes when people need to understand these configuration things, so that when you are setting up some of these things, the reason why you need to understand these terms, so that when you are setting up, you don't have errors and you don't have your network functioning in a terrible way. That's part of the reason why we need to understand some of these things theoretically. Things to consider when using the Azure private link. When using the Azure private link, you have to consider private connectivity to Azure, to services on Azure. You have to consider integration with on-premises and paired networks. You have to consider protection against data exfiltration for Azure resources. Then you consider services delivered directly to customer virtual networks. So I believe in your earlier classes you must have done they must have taught you on Azure regions that are closest to you, and like we spoke earlier on, as Titi mentioned about West Europe and being closer to us here in Nigeria. So this means that you consider private connectivity to services on Azure. Connect privacy to services running in other Azure regions. So I don't know if you've noticed, but some features of Microsoft that are available in our Azure region is not available in some other Azure regions. For example, what is available in the West Europe of the Azure may not be available in East Europe of Azure. So connect privacy to services running in Azure regions. Traffic remains on the Microsoft network with no public internet access. That means that it is kept secure. Those are some of the benefits of the Azure private link. It considers integration with on-premises and paired networks. So when you have paired networks that are already existing, for example, you have one in Nigeria and maybe Kenya, you now connect them. It's Microsoft hosts the traffic, so you don't need to set up public peering or use internet to migrate your workloads to the cloud or to share anything. You don't need to. The Azure private link can help you do that. The Azure private link you need to, when you are setting it up, you also have to consider protection against data exfiltration from Azure resources. That's one of the things. So it provides you maps private endpoints to Azure platform as a service resources PaaS, where there's a security incident within your network. Only the mapped resources are accessible. This implementation removes the threat of data exfiltration. So sometimes people, when hackers get into your network and they start to send phishing mails, start to do a whole lot of things, threatening workers or threatening employees, one of the things that people need to consider is that the Azure private link protection against data exfiltration for Azure resources. What are these Azure resources? There are several Azure resources we have, but anyway, let me not focus on that now. So consider services delivered directly to customer virtual networks. Privately consume Azure PaaS, Microsoft partner, and their own services. Private link works across Microsoft Entra tenants. These are the role-based accounts. These are the types of accounts, Microsoft Azure accounts. Microsoft Entra tenant to help unify your experience across services. send, approve, or reject requests directly without permissions or role-based access controls. So, interactive lab simulation.
We are willing to take questions now. Tosin, thank you very, very much. We appreciate your time. So is a production environment. You will need to know the size of resources that you want to set up, for instance, what the virtual machine size will be, how many processor it will have, how many memory should be on that server, the disk that you want, the size of the disk. What is the size? Though this one now say, this is more of how many disk can you have on the machine. You can have up to four disk. On this machine that we selected, we can have just 2 disk on it. So is this the disk or this one is the disk? Oh, sorry, this is the disk. This is the number of disk that is supported. And what is this? Data disk. Okay, so here we can have up to 2 data disk, but we can have up to 4 local storage on the machine, on the server. Sorry, no, sorry, this should be size. Is this size? Hold on. Let me not. So, but these are not really important for what we want to do. We're just concerned about memory, we are concerned about RAM. Then the next thing you have to consider is we have selected it. The next thing, so we have selected this size, that one CPU, 1 gig of memory at $11 per month. So the next thing we want to check is the disk. Most time people just go to this review and create. So once you say review and create, you see what happened. Although I've changed it because this is a machine. Okay, no. Oh, it's a new one, so I've not changed it. So by default, when you are creating virtual machine, by default, it pick premium SSD storage for you. So now let's see this premium SSD storage. Let's say I want to be okay. So because this is OS disk, right? We can just change it. So for a production environment, depending on what you want to use it for, if cost is an issue, instead of using premium SSD, because SSD is faster than HDD, right? So instead of using premium SSD, you can change it to standard SSD. From here, you can see they are saying light use, but it doesn't matter. Production environment can use standard SSD. You can also use HDD if what you are setting up is not so critical that have to be at the speed of light kind of, then you can fall to HDD. So in our case, I had to fall to HDD to minimize my credits. So there is the amount rather. There's supposed to be, I'm supposed to be able to see now. So now depending on what you are trying to achieve, right? There are some disks that does not support some service type. So like some scaling set option, you have to consider the type of disk you are using. So in this one, by just using an example, I'll just change it to standard HDD. Then you can change the sizes. Default is okay for operating system. You don't need more than that. Though if you are going to be installing updates regularly, you should consider going above that. The other thing is, one of the things you can do there is to add manage disk, but the course is not really concerned about you adding extra disk to a VM. It's just concerned about you creating a disk that is very, very effective, that can give you what you need in the immediate, right? So once you do that, always remember to do that, to alter those things. Now, remember when we wanted to try to do the lab the other time, one of the things that we are going to do is to select our virtual machine network, the VNet. Now, for every virtual machine that you create, by default, it creates a virtual network for it. This is a virtual network. It creates for it. So it also creates its own subnet. So for the lab that we are talking about, for some of us, the lab might say create a virtual network before you start pairing. It's still okay because the virtual machine you are creating is already coming with its own dedicated virtual network. So if you have two virtual machines that you created, they are completely running on two different virtual networks that cannot talk to each other by default. For them to talk to each other, they must be on the same VNet. For two virtual machines to talk to each other, they must be on the same VNet. So if your purpose for an organization, for instance, if they say, we need to set up a domain controller or a web server, for instance, and they have to be in HA mode. In that case, the first thing you need to do is to first create your virtual network down. So that when, just like we did earlier, so that when we are now creating the virtual machine, we drop down, instead of it allowing it to create the virtual network for us, we select the VNet that we have created. That way, the subnet IP address, the IP addressing subnet that we have in this VNet is what every VM that uses this VNet will fall into. That's where they will pull their IP from. So that's that about that. So I just say, let me show you this. Some of these are also very, very important. For these areas, maybe advanced network security group is more of advanced firewall configuration, sir. Then there are some other things. Public IP also, it takes some money, but it's okay depending on what you want to use it for. For those that will be working on projects that have load balancer, you have information in this area, that you can. Yes, there will be step by step for the lab. For the lab, yes, there's step by step. For the project, you just have a project given to you. You are going to sort it out. However, if you are confused, any group that is confused, that need guidance, can actually book an appointment with us and we can walk you through. But we are not going to be telling you what to do. We are just going to be telling you how you are going to run the project. How you are going to run the project, sort it out. Okay. I don't understand that. But what is going to be is just, we are going to give you, it's like a test, not, let's call it test. It's something to help you rub minds, something to help you think out of the box, something to help you so that when you finish from here, this is a 8-week program. So if you are going for an interview, you will not be saying, I don't have any experience. You had experience. So part of your experience, part of the experience project is this one that will give to you. So you just say, oh, I was part of the team that set up a security center solution for a healthcare organization to manage their infrastructure. So that's the way it works. To do. You will come back and do your presentation and tell us how your thought process around deciding the component of Azure to integrate or to add to achieve your project for the company that is employing you to do so. So that's that. So that's one thing I wanted to show us. Also, part of the email, we're still trying to finalize on that, whether it's going to be something that will send to individual person or something we'll just send to you that you just select. So one of our sponsors has also given us some learning materials, like a proper book that you can go through, read, even to write your exam. When you're ready for exam, you can use it. So they still make use of the Microsoft Learn content, but they go beyond that. So we're going to be sharing that with you as well. For the project, we might have up to 6 people in the project or in a group. So make sure you are able to work together, because we are testing everything, not just technical. We are testing your soft skills too, around collaboration, around team player, being a team player, around communication, around conflict management, or conflict resolution. We are going to test all round. So make sure you put in your best efforts and then come out with the best results at the end of the day, based on the conversation, the communication before the project, before the event started, or at the start of the program. You recall we said we're going to have three best project group that's going to present at the during the graduation session, or on the graduation day. We have three best project people. So someone is saying, can you create project subgroup on Discord? No, we are not putting it on Discord. We are going to, like I said, you're going to get your account. So in each tenant, every Azure subscription is hosted on different tenant for every group. So in each group tenant, we are going to create your account there and create team so that you can use team to better collaborate there. Okay. I think I get, for you to quickly reach each other if somebody is not on team. I will confirm if that will be possible. I will confirm from our our managers. Okay. Let me call it, the word is not coming. We'll confirm from textile managers how we should go about that quick reaching out to people. If we can create this thing here, create group here, or if we can create a WhatsApp group in addition to the Teams group. But I feel the Teams group is better for you to be able to keep all your document and information in one place. So this is the other way you can go about it. By the time you have your group, just in case, you can also kind of create among yourself, exchange number and create a group. You can appoint someone like that will manage the project, appoint different people, and everybody is able to collaborate together. Those are we are trying to test. Because when you get when you get a job, you won't be working alone. You will definitely be working with if not somebody else in your unit, you will be working definitely with another department or another unit. So all of those things is what you need. Let's go, for those of us that are students, let's go outside of school knowledge and then bring the work knowledge into into what we do. So I think that's that. So if you have any other question, I just quickly use this screen to show us how we should be able to manage our credits. And for somebody that had question around availability group the other time. So do we have any other question? Let me check. Okay. Okay, within the tenant, fine. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. We need additional platform. Yes, like I said, we'll confirm if we can create group in additional platform. But if not, you just organize yourself and have your WhatsApp group with each other, and share with each other there.